rather not speak about certain issues, particularly talking about the issue of antisemitism, or the rise of antisemitism. Because anal palali mamanon, that we are workers of light. Our objective is to spread more light, more love, more holiness, more godliness in this world. But with the purpose of chizuk, to give encouragement and to understand a little bit the process and to allow for more hope, to be more hopeful in this world, to live with more tikva, with more connection to a future. We'll talk a little bit about this idea, and specifically a rise of a new mutation of antisemitism, which we haven't experienced before. Jews haven't experienced before, at least for the last few thousand years, which is an anti-Semitism that is connected to a particular land, where the hate is directed towards Jewish people around the world, telling and shouting at Jews, this rising of hate, that Jews are colonizers, that are occupying a land, something about the land of Eretz Yisrael, the holy land of Israel, something connected to the land. This is a new phenomenon, of course. Culturally, historically, this is a new phenomenon. Years ago, over 100 years ago, certainly, and before that, many times the anti-Semite would cry and say that the Jews should leave Poland and go to Israel, go to Palestine, the way it was called by the Romans, go to Eretz Yisrael. And now it's almost the inverse, where it's saying go back to Poland, as if Poland is the indigenous place of the Jewish people. So to understand a little bit, what is this idea of this hate? Why does it rise? And what is the tikkun for it? What is the proper rectification that we can do internally and collectively in order to mitigate and to transform this world into a holier and a more hopeful place? So generally, everyone knows that the Gemara says in Shabbos that one of the reasons why Sinai, that the mountain was called Sinai, the Torah was given, is from there, hate came about, that the hate for the Jewish people, there was a revealing of tremendous light in this world, and there's always the Zeldomazeh, there's always the dark side, the Kelipa, the negative side of that rises up whenever there's a revealing of something that's very holy, something is being birthed, something new. This is a general principle, and you see this also in life, that whenever there's a birth of new life, there's a form of tumah, there's a form of impurity. Literally, when a mother gives birth to a child, there's literally, physically, there's lots of blood and lots of forms of death and endings and tumah. And that's because whenever there's a possibility of a new light being revealed, let's say, for example, also on Erev Shabbos, before the holiness of Shabbos comes about into this world, people generally that are even keeping Shabbos and are careful about Shabbos end up sometimes fighting or struggling or screaming. Of course, this should not be this way, but there's a rise of this possibility, the rise of tumah, when there's an opening of possibility of higher levels of Kedushas, of sanctity. So that's on one very, very general level. But let's think about this a little bit in terms of historically. Historically, certainly from a perspective from when the Jewish people, from after the Churban Bayis Sheni, destruction of the second Beis Hamikdash forward, when Jews were first sold into slavery to Spain, which was the end of the Roman world, of the known world, and then eventually they migrated throughout the entire Europe. There was a certain envy always that the local people, had against the Jew, and that is because, very, very broadly speaking, the Jew, in many of these cultures throughout the entire history of medieval times, until the modern era, that the Jews are the only large minority and successful large minority in these, whether they were Christian or Muslim countries, ruled countries. And because there was envy for this successful minority, whenever things were getting bad, And wherever a culture was in decline, and people were in decline, there was always needed to be someone to be blamed. And the blame always was directed to the most obvious and most easy target, which was the Jew. So instead of taking responsibility for your own decline, taking responsibility, which would be the spiritual and the correct and ethical and the correct way of living, to take responsibility for your own decline and to rectify it and to change course, the popular conversation was always, let's blame somebody, and that somebody was the minority that lived amongst them. And since it was a successful minority, it was always the Jew. And the Jew were either what could be called, and is called, they were either an anti-Semitism that was punching up, which that the Jew were the elite and successful ones, that the Jew were controlling the world, controlling that environment. Or it was punching down, that the Jews are the vermin, or God forbid, or something else that is eating up on the culture. So it was eating up, and therefore they should immigrate and go out of the country and leave the country. So either was punching up or punching down. But the idea was that whenever there was a society or civilization in decline, there's always a rise of anti-Semitism. And that's why any culture and any people that understand a little bit of history have to take notice that if there is a rise of anti-Semitism in a country, that shows that there's something falling apart in the seams. And the people in the country are not willing to take responsibility for their own decline and to rectify it and to change the course, and therefore the easiest thing is to blame their successful minority. Overall, throughout the last 2,000 years, there was a type of religious anti-Semitism, or a religious type of oppression. There were certain doctrines, theological doctrines, that were put in place during certain periods of time that said that the Jew has to survive but not thrive. So the local authorities could make the life of the Jew very miserable, tax them very highly, but ensure that they survive, but they don't strive. This was for theological reasons, but it was essentially it was a form of religious persecution, which means that through all the many pogroms and persecutions and the Crusades, if you study a little Jewish history, you'll understand that there was some type of choice for Jews who were living in those countries that were persecuted, certainly during the times of a pogrom or crusade or another type of massacre, which is if this Jew would denounce, God forbid, Rahman al-Islam, would denounce his Judaism and Shema Rahman al-Islam, and he would choose to live not openly as a Jew and quote-unquote to convert, even though that's not possible. If this Jew would choose to be that way, he was usually left alone. And that's what happened time in and time out. This is the time of the Crusades, which most Jews chose not to, as described in the great chronicles of those times. And the same thing also happened with the expulsion of the Jews in Spain, where a large part of the Jewish population remained in Spain. They remained as conversos, as hidden Jews, etc. And then a new type of anti-Semitism arose, which saw its full fruition, which discussed previously, its full bloom, its full ugliness during the time of the Holocaust in the 1940s, late 30s and early 40s, which was a racial eugenics type of anti-Semitism, that somehow the Jew has a different body than the non-Jew, that there's a non-Jewish body and there's a Jewish body, and there's certain features that the Jew has. This shows up in many of world literature, not just in Nazi Germany, that there was some type of racial identity of the Jew, and therefore there was a persecution against the Jewish body, and that was not dependent on Judaism as a religion. And like famously, the story of the Baal Shem Tov, where the Baal Shem Tov saw the Samach Mem, had an encounter with the Prince of Darkness, the source of all evil. Obviously, this is an internal conversation. I had this conversation with the Samach Mem and asked him that it used to be that if a Jew denounces Judaism, he would survive. And then there was a particular story where the Jews were put into a situation where they were told that if they convert, they survive, and if they're not, they will be killed. Some converted out of their Judaism, denounced their Judaism, and then eventually they were all massacred. And the Baal Shem Tov wanted to understand why, what kind of Kelipa is this, what kind of negativity is this. And this represents, as we spoke about previously, the previous year, this represents the idea of the Tchias HaGuf, when there is going to be the resurrection of the body of Klal Yisrael, collectively and individually. Which the idea is that ultimately Olam Haba, the world to come, will be experienced in the body, like the Ramban and Teres Chassidus explains, that it's specifically within the body. The Kelipa side of that, the Zel Umazeh, is that there was a rise of a type of antagonistic antisemitism against the Jewish body. This is in the year 1940s, and this is still continuing up until this year where we're livingly present, in 2025, which is moving to 2040, which will be the beginning of the actual Tchias HaMesim, the resurrection of the dead, as explained before. But now, a new type of anti-Semitism arose in the last few years, which also began in the 1940s, but again, reared its ugly head and became prominent during the last few years, nearing the year 2040, nearing the time of the beginning of the process of the actual Tchias HaMesim, the resurrection of the dead, the resurrection of the body, which is a anti-Semitism connected to the guf, to the body, to the eretz, to the land of Israel. That the accusation is that the most indigenous people to a land, the Jewish people, who have lived in this land thousands of years and have been there throughout the entire diaspora and have prayed 3 times a day to return to the land of Israel and always maintained a presence of Jews that lived throughout, thick and thin, throughout the entire, from the destruction of the Second Temple, obviously before that, lived in the land of Israel. And there's no country in the world that speaks a more indigenous language to an indigenous people like the Jewish people speaking Lashon Kodesh or a variation of that in the Hebrew language, in the place of their ancestors, in the place where they were survived and were throughout the entire time. What is the accusation? What is the anti-Semite saying? That the Jew doesn't belong here, that the land is not their land, that they don't belong there, that they're foreigners, they're occupiers. This is the Lumazah. This is the other side. This is the Kelipa that rises. This is the Tumah, the impurity that rises before there's the birth of the Kedusha, before there's a birth of the holy and something magnificent, which is obviously with the coming and revealing of Moshiach. The Gra writes, and it's brought down by the Svarim, that through the merit of keeping Trumas and Ma'ases, Shmitas, whether it's Minatayim or Darbanan, to keeping the laws connected to the fruit of the land of Eretz Yisrael, to be in the land of Eretz Yisrael, will be zoiche to Kabbas Nitchi Yisrael, will be zoiche to the gathering the gathering for the 4 corners of the world, in Eretz Yisrael, in the land of Israel, which is the Guf of Klal Yisrael, which is actually happening right now, and it's been happening for the last 100 years, where there's a gathering of Rav Minyan Bin of Klal Yisrael, a large majority, almost a majority, a complete majority, of Jews living in one particular place, and that's part of the Kabbas Nitchi Yisrael, that's part of Kibbutz Galuyos, in the process, even before the process of the coming Mashiach, the revealing Mashiach, like the Rambam writes. Now, throughout exile, throughout the last 2,000 years, from the destruction of this second Beis HaMikdash, there are 3 levels of Kiddush. There were 2 levels of Kiddush that were revealed, 2 levels of holiness that were revealed in this world. There's Mekadesh Yisrael v'Hazmanim. There's the sanctity of Yisrael, of Knesset Yisrael, b'Shem Kol Yisrael, the collective of Klal Yisrael, which is a Kedusha. The Kedusha in the collective, the Nitzchis in the collective, the eternity of the collective, which is that Ein Tzibur Mesa, that there's an eternity for the people of Israel, the Knesset Yisrael, and there's a place of B'Shem Kol Yisrael, the place of where everyone is connected, interconnected, which is the Kedushas of Klal Yisrael, the holiness and sanctity of the people of Israel, of Klal Yisrael. And then there's also Kedushas Zmanim. There's also the Kedusha that which shows up throughout exile, which is Kedushas Zmanim. Which Kedushas Zman? The sanctity of time, that's revealed in Yom Tov. That Yom Tov is called Moyadei. Moyadei Hashanah. Moyadei comes from the word, a Moyed is like Kruya Moyed, oil Moyed. Moyed is a Vad. It means an encounter, a place of meeting, a place of an encounter. So there's oil Moyed in the times of the Beis Hamikdash, in the time of the Mishkan, there was an oil there was an encounter in space where we encountered Hashem's presence within space. The Asharas HaShechina was in the Beis Hamikdash. The resting of the Shechina's place was revealed in the Beis Hamikdash, in this space. And then once the destruction of the second Beis Hamikdash occurred, and there was no longer this physical place, then the Shechina moved away. Then Asharas HaShechina is no longer in this particular place, even though, of course, Asharas HaShechina is still in HaMakom HaMikdash, and therefore it still has Kedusha, because the Shechina, like the Rambam writes, and the Shechina is Lebetela, and it still has Kedushas, it still has sanctity in that place, and we're not allowed to enter that place. But the revealed presence of the Shechina is not revealed in the Beis Hamikdash any longer, because the destruction. Where's the main Kedusha revealed? In Zman, in time, and in Knesset Yisrael. The Mikra Kodesh, which is Yom Tov, that becomes the time of sensing the presence of Kedusha, of sanctity within time. Now, there's Zman and there's Makom, there's time and there's space, and there's consciousness. There's Olam Shana Nefesh, there's time, space, and consciousness. In the creation, when the Torah speaks about creation, the Torah speaks about the creation of space. Hashem created the heaven and earth, which is space. But as the Maggid of Mezrich writes, and the Gra writes, many of the Tzaddikim write, that before the creation of space, which is the tangibility, the physicality, what's empirically observable of creation, there's first the creation of Zman. There's the Seder Zman, there's the order of time, which is Mati and Loimati, which is before the actual creation of time, the possibility of moving up and down, of Tenua, and then there was the creation of actual time, which is first the creation of time and then the creation of space. In contrast, or in comparison to space, time is conceptual. Time is perceived in the mind of the person that's perceiving time. It's not an actual reality that can be observed or touched. So time is more a conceptual idea. In the conceptual idea of time and Knesset Yisrael, and in consciousness, which is less tangible than the place of space, throughout the time of exile, throughout the 2,000 years of exile, the Kedusha rests within Yisrael and within Zman, specifically within Yisrael and Zman, specifically within Knesset Yisrael, in the collective Klal Yisrael. That's where the Kedusha lies, the Shechina rests, and is revealed, and the eternity of the Shechina is revealed in the eternity of people of Israel, and within the sanctity of time. That's why, for example, Reb Saadia Gaon writes, in the 10th century, Reb Saadia Gaon writes, Ein Yisraelum El B'Torah, or a variation of that phrase, the way it's quoted, is that Yisrael, the definition of Yisrael, the definition of what it means to be a Jew in this world, is to be connected to the Holy Torah, which is that we're connected to an idea, a way of being, a way of thinking, a way of seeing this world, a prism, which is a virtual reality. Therefore, the people that did not have a land, that were landless, because that's the definition of exile. You're exiled. We left the land. We were rejected from the land, much like the story in the beginning of the Garden of Eden, where we were left. There was a girish, there was a leaving, a divorcement from the land. As existing without the land, the Kedusha showed up in Zman, and showed up in time, and showed up in Makom. It showed up in time and showed up in Knesset Yisrael, showed up in consciousness and within time, but not in space. Now we know that there's also Kedushas HaMakom, there's also the idea of Kedushas HaMakom. Kedushas HaMakom means the sanctity within space. The Mishnah in Kelim tells us, the Mishnah says, and lists that there's Esek Kedushas, there's different levels of Kedusha in Eretz Yisrael, there are many different spaces within Eretz Yisrael, and each one has a higher level of Kedusha, a higher level of sanctity. Now this not only does this mean that halachically that has certain applications, because this Kedusha demands a certain practice, but like the Kuzari writes, and other Rishonim write, that there's an actual Kedusha in this space. There's a higher level of Kedusha. There are various grades of Kedusha. There are 10 levels of Kedusha, 10 levels of sanctity. They correspond also as well to the 10 nations that were conquered. The 10 nations of Keni, Keniz, Kadmoini, and also the 3 nations across, which corresponds to the 7 midas, 7 attributes, and the Gimel Rishonos, the 3, which the Moichin, the intelligence, which we reveal in the time of Moshiach, which corresponds to the 10 levels of Kedusha. 10 levels of grades of Kedusha, if you wish, that exist within Klal Yisrael itself. There are 10 levels, which correspond to the 10 forms of Kedusha. Kedushas HaMakom, the sanctity that exists within in this place, of course, is in the Beis HaMikdash. Ultimately, that's the Bechir, that's the highest level of Kedusha. That's the place in the Beis HaMikdash, and obviously in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, in the Holy of Holies. The Rambam, when the Rambam speaks about Hilchos Beis HaBechir, the laws of choice, where HaKadosh Baruch Hu chose the place of Eretz Yisrael, the Kedushas of Eretz Yisrael, speaks about the Makom HaMizbeach, the space, very much the space of the Mizbeach. He says, the Rambam writes that the Makom HaMizbeach Mechuvim B'Yoser, that it's very Mechuvim, very intentional, that specifically that place of the Mizbeach, like the Rambam learns in contrast to the Ramban, that the Iker, the main idea of the Beis HaMikdash, was a place to bring offerings for the idea of atonement, versus the Ramban, which is the idea for revealing of the Torah, which is the Aron. That the main idea of the Mizbeach is in space to bring kapara, to bring offerings. And the main idea of the Beis HaMikdash is the Mizbeach, and the Mizbeach is Mekayim Mechuvim B'Yoseh. The place of the Mizbeach is specifically tailored to that particular place. And the Rambam writes, because that place is other Makom Kapirasin. If the Rambam brings a Medrash, the Medrash says that man was created from the place of his atonement. Now, even though the Gemara in Sanhedrin and other places says that the man's body was taken from different parts of all over the world, but the Iker, main idea of the body, was Memakim Kaparasin. He was created from the place, from this specific place. So the Kedusha of the Adam was created from the Kedushas HaMakom, from this particular place. What's the Iker? What's the source of all space, of all Makim? That's the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the holiest of the spaces, the Nasar Kedushas, and the highest level of Kedusha. And what is the highest place of Kodesh HaKadoshim? What's the Kodesh HaKadoshim? That's the source of all space. Like the Gemara says in Yuma, that there's an Evan Shasiya, there's this rock, and the rock is Evan Shasiya. It's called the Shasiya because Shemanahus Kol Kuli, for that's where space all emerges, and that's the portal through which all space emerges from. That's the Makim, that's Kedushas HaMakim. When there'll be the resurrection, the Tchias HaMeisen, the Guf of Klal Yisrael, that the body of Klal Yisrael, collectively and individually, and all the lives, all the multiple lives of everything physical, like the Leshem writes, any self that will live, the multiple millions of selves that appear in every single moment will arise and be manifest as a house, a space that's holding the presence of Hashem, holding the Shekhinah in its presence. When there'll be a resurrection, so the Gemara says in the Anik Suvas that there'll be mechilas, there will be these passageways, these tunnels through which the bodies that are in Chutz La'aretz will enter into Eretz Yisrael, that are outside of Israel, enter into Eretz Yisrael, and through that there'll be the Tchiyah. So the Tchiyah Samesim, the Tchiyah, the resurrection of the dead body, of the physical bodies of Klal Yisrael, has to occur in Eretz Yisrael, in the Kedushas Eretz Yisrael, in the Makim, in the original space of everything. Because the Etzem Luz, which is the eternity that exists within the body, within every single body, within the Guf of the body, is connected to the Etzem Luz of Makim. That's the Makim Aluz, that's the place of the ladder, that's the place in Yaakov's ladder, which is Mechuven also towards the Beis HaMikdash, which is the essence of space, will have connected to the essence of the body. So Tchiyas HaMesim, and the Tchiyah, the resurrection of the body, and the resurrection of the land itself, is also like the Gemara says in Kesuvos at the end. The Gemara talks about all the different things that happen in the times of the Eretz Yisrael. And the Gemara speaks about how the land will bear fruit, and this is one of the signs of Geula, one of the signs of the redemption, that the land itself, the Eretz Yisrael, will start giving a period, will start giving this beautiful fruits, and eventually it will be the Tchias HaMeisen, the Guf itself, the physical body, will be resurrected in the physical space, which is the Guf of Eretz Yisrael. That's the Kedushas HaMakom. In the Kedushas HaMakom, the sanctity of space, we say that eventually there'll come a time, like the Rambam concludes the entire halachas of Yad Chazaka, that a Mala Aretz Deis Hashem Kamayim Laim L'chasim, the Mala Aretz, that the land itself will be filled with the wisdom of Hashem. So when Klal Yisrael will be Goy Echad Ba'aretz, there'll be revealing of the Goy Echad Ba'aretz, the Kedushas Eretz Yisrael, the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael, and the Guf of Klal Yisrael, and that's the ultimate dir b'tachtonim. That's the ultimate revelation of the dwelling place of Hashem in His presence. Is Hashem's presence is revealed not only in the world of ideas, and not only in the world of time, in Kedushas Asman, and not only in Kedushas HaNefesh, revealing in the Nefesh of Klal Yisrael, the Kedusha within the soul of Klal Yisrael, but it will be a Kedusha that's revealed in the Eretz itself, in the land in itself, which is reflected in the Tchias HaMesim of the Guf of Klal Yisrael, in the Makom, in the space itself. That's why eventually, there's a medrash, even though there's not a clear medrash of where it says it clearly, but it says that it's brought down by many Gedolei Yisrael that the Eretz Yisrael will become a time when the Eretz Yisrael, the Kedushas of Eretz Yisrael, the sanctity of Eretz Yisrael, will mispash it throughout the entire world. Doesn't mean that the entire world will become Eretz Yisrael, but the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael that comes from that space will manifest and will flow into the entire earth, the entire world, the entire Makom. That's ultimately the time of Moshiach, the revealing of Moshiach, which the whole not only will be Kedushas Hasman, Kedushas HaNefesh, and Kedushas HaTorah. There will be the sanctity of Torah and conceptual time, and in conceptual in the mindset, and conceptual in the soul. But it will be a revealing of a Kedusha even in the Makom. Now we have a miniature. This idea is in the Bati Knesses Bati Midrash. Like the Gemara says, the Gemara speaks about the Galu. And the Shechina is the Gemara says that the Siddiq Bati Knesses Bati Midrash Bavel, that eventually the Bati Knesses, the shuls and the space that we create a sanctity in those spaces, will eventually enter into Eretz Yisrael. And the Mashal says that means that there's a kedusha of, and it will become part of the Beis HaMikdash. It will elevate and become part of Mikdash, which means when you walk into a shul today, when you walk into a synagogue, you walk into a holy place, a place of study, you're walking into a chelik of Eretz Yisrael, a part of Eretz Yisrael. Chaim Sofer says that this happens every Yid, whenever a person does a Seder on Pesach night, Salabayis, when a person's house is sanctified, and that house itself becomes a chelik of Eretz Yisrael. But the point is, what we're trying to explain, is that we're entering into a time period where ultimately there will be revealing. Ultimately, the revealing of Moshiach in a revealed way, and ultimately the time of Tchias HaMesim, the Guf of Klal Yisrael, and ultimately the revealing of the Kedusha of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Yichud Atata, the Lord Rebbeinu Shem Kvei Mechus, the Makom Shechem, Shem Kvei Mechus, in the place of what seems to be harsh, in the Guf, in the harshest part of the land. And Shechem is the harshest part of the land of Eretz Yisrael, because that's the place. Therefore, it's the place that Rashi brings out also the Gemara and Soita. That's the place. It was the burial, because it was a harsh land. That even Shem Kvei Mechus, even there, Hashem's presence is there, even in a place of that Makom, in that space. And because there is going to be this birthing of this geula, of this redemptive, of this consciousness, of this awareness, and the revealing of Mashiach Tzidkeinu B'Meher V'Yameinu, the revealing of Mashiach that we pray for and hope for every moment, the revealing of Mashiach in this moment that will reveal the Kedushas HaMakom, the Kedusha, the sanctity within space. So the Zelum Hazeh, the Kelipa rises, specifically in this very period, this time period, because of there's now going to be this revealing of kedusha not only in Zman and the Torah and in Nefashis Yisrael, but also in Makom, in space, like we spoke previously, in the Guf of the Tchiyah, the body of Klal Yisrael, to be Tchias HaMesim. So therefore, there's a rise of antisemitism, there's a rise of Kelipa, there's a rise of the negative side that is specifically connected to Makom, specifically connected to space, that you in the space that we do belong, and that's the place that other Makom Kaparos and even that's the place where we're born, and that's the essential space that we belong to Eretz Yisrael. And every Yid has a chelik in Eretz Yisrael. Every Yid has a part of Eretz Yisrael that belongs to them, so to speak. They have a chelik in Eretz Yisrael. And what is Kelipa saying? What is the rising of this negative, hateful voices saying? That you don't belong here. That's the umazah of before the revealing of our connection, our deep connection to Eretz Yisrael, and the kedusha of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and the sanctity of Kudsha Brichu that will be revealed, B'Shchinte will be revealed in this lower world, and they will be revealed in the place of Makom. That's the parallel. That's the Kelipa that's rising before the kedusha. So what do we have to do? What do we have to do? So we have to understand that in order for birth to happen, in order for us to move forward, and generally as a collective, and also individuals, two things can either happen. Either there's going to be pressure from the outside in the form of hate. And not that we have to indulge in the hate, I guess like we begin that we have to be peoples of light and of love and of giving. And of course, hate has to be eradicated. That's a separate conversation. But the idea is that it's internally what we have to do is either we're going to, and whenever there's going to be a birth of something, either there's going to be pressure from the outside, like we said, in the form of hate, which causes us to break open and to reveal a new form of light, because it's calling for us to reveal something deeper, which is that it's calling for us to understand the Kedushas HaMakom, the sanctity of space, and ultimately to reveal the sanctity of space, which means we have to change our mindset from being a conceptual people, a people that are connected in a virtual world, interconnected virtually, and also connected to our spirituality and to our ruchnis and to Torah and to Kadosh Baruch Hu through a virtual world, in the world of thought and the world of processes and the world of time, but also to bring it down into a place of makom. Either that's going to be forced from us from the outside and we have to defend it, therefore we have to connect to that reality, or we can choose it on our own. And when we choose on our own, we don't have to chas v'shalom go through any hardships. That when we recognize and we are connected in a place of makom, in a place of guf, and recognize the sanctity and the practice of avodah b'gashmius, to serve Hashem with our gashmius, with our physicality, and to recognize that every physical thing that we have in this world, every makom that we are, is an opportunity to connect. Vayifka b'makom, to connect in that space, in the place of makom, connect to makom, which is one of the names of Hashem, which is Kivavki Birbuah, the idea of 186, which is connect to ultimate HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to connect to every single place of makom. That's the way we could transform our own consciousness and our own selves to think of ourselves differently, both individually and collectively, without the pressure of the external. And that's the avodah of a Yid today. So we can move to an understanding of what it means to be in this world as a Jew. What does it mean to be a Yid today in this world? Not only in Mikra Kodesh and Zmanim, in the Kedushas Zman, and in Kedushas Nafesh Yisrael and Kedusha in learning, but how do we actually bring it down into a Gashmistic level? And what does it mean to live Gashmias in a physical world, in a place of Makom, not in a detached way, but how does it engage in taking out the garbage and controlling and having a police force? What does it mean to be today, to live in a way of Kedusha in the place of commerce, in the way of Makom, the commercial, in the way of the world? And that's the avodah. Anyways, have a lichtige Shabbos. So.